Hola, buenos días a todos y todas. Seguimos con nuestra programación de este foro de diseño aquí en la Universidad Iberoamericana de la Ciudad de México. Y esta nueva plática que tenemos en este momento la vamos a tener con nuestro invitado Colin Giles. Sin embargo, antes de presentar a Colin, quisiera agradecer a nuestros patrocinadores, Cuchara Estudio y Déjate Querer, por el mobiliario, las esculturas que viste en este escenario, que son producidas por Waterhouse Art Direction, así que muchas gracias a nuestros patrocinadores. Colin Giles es actualmente el director de los programas de 3D Animation and Animation Concept Art en la prestigiosa Vancouver Film School. Y brevemente, Colin cuenta con más de 20 años de experiencia profesional en la industria de la animación, con amplios créditos tanto en animación tradicional como por ordenador. Sus créditos incluyen trabajos para Cartoon Network, Disney Interactive y HBO. Colin estudió arte y diseño en la Universidad Emily Carr de Vancouver y graduado en el programa de animación comercial de la Universidad de Capilano. Ha adquirido experiencia como director creativo, animador de personajes, supervisor y diseñador. Entre los aspectos más destacados de su carrera se encuentran múltiples títulos de Disney Interactive, las producciones de televisión como Robot Boy, Mucha Lucha, Damn BS, Ren and Stimpy's Adult Cartoon Party, perdón, el título está un poco largo, Jacob Tutu y Thomas and Friends, y los anuncios para Cartoon Network, Ford, Starbucks y Kellogg's. Largometraje Felizmente Nunca Más, El mundo embrujado de El Supervisto, 8 noches locas de Adam Sandler y Fiesta de Salchichas, y la supervisión de una multitud de películas de estudiantes premiadas como jefe de departamento en la Escuela de Cine de Vancouver. Colin, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's wonderful that you have this talk in this Foro of Design, so welcome again.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here, and it's a very big honor to be invited here. Juan and I spent some time in my office many months ago, and I promised I would be here, and here I am. So it's wonderful to be here to spend the day at this wonderful university. Today I'm here to talk about the design of storytelling. And my name is Colin Giles, and yes, I come from the Vancouver Film School. It's been a wonderful journey, and I've been enjoying my time here in Mexico. And I hope to bring some information to you today, some insight into the design of storytelling. As humans, we communicate via story. We are the only known living creatures that communicate in that format. And so I think it's imperative that no matter what program you're in, no matter what career you may be pursuing, that you pursue more information on becoming a more effective and more clear communicator. So we are going to have 3 chapters in this story today. I'm going to talk about finding your story as character, and we're going to talk about conflict as a requirement in storytelling. So when I do this talk, I generally do it in a classroom or a theater, and it's very interactive. So I'm going to be giving the answers instead of asking the questions today. So I will be the question asker and the answer at the same time. So I've got both. So I'm well prepared.
Sure.
So at the school, and I'm sure that happens here in Ibero, in some of the projects you have, maybe you're writing something or presenting something, you have to find where to start. And I think a lot of times we have a lot of queries about that or nervousness about that. And at the school that I teach at, I get a lot of students coming to me and saying, I don't have any ideas, I don't know where to start. Or I'll get the opposite where they say, I've got 1,000 ideas, which one do I pick? So I went on the internet, as you do, and I looked for some information. And I love information graphics, and I found this helpful dialogue here, which talks about understanding your story, choosing your plot, choosing your hero, Choosing your characters, observe the rule of threes, which we can talk about, and then choose your media, which would be a written media, a film, television, whatever it may be. And this is sort of a 6-step process to create a story. Except it's a terrible idea. This is the kind of trappings that we find ourselves in, where we try and find a sort of paint by numbers or a very easy formula to tell a story. And what it does is it loses its impact. It loses its connection and empathy to the audience, because the storyteller has no connection to it. We're making the story as if we're just putting together a recipe. But we want to put ourselves in our story, which is a very scary thing to do. So in my career, I've been involved in directing and supervising, and now at the school, every day I'm helping students improve their stories, mentor them through that process, and it can be very scary. So for me, I've started to do a lot of research over the years. And the first thing I did was I went to the dictionary and found out what was the definition of storytelling. And the definition is the sharing of events in words, sound, and or images, often by improvisation or embellishment. It's a beautiful definition. And to me, 2 words stand out. Sharing, which is communication, or embellishment, which is the creativity. And if there is a formula today, it would be communication plus creativity equals art. And so that's our pursuit. As communicators, as humans, we communicate with each other. We share through communication. And ideally, we embellish those communications to get to the very essence of the idea we're trying to share. Whether it's a film, whether it's a novel, whether it's a picture or a photograph or a presentation at work to your boss, we can be more effective communicators, and we can trust our creativity. Now, I assume it's a much more beautiful saying in Spanish than it is in English, but in English we have a saying that says, a picture says 1,000 words. And it is... Is it the same?
Yeah.
Perfect. So you'll understand this. This is an award-winning photograph that was taken in the mid-2015, somewhere around there, in Boston, Massachusetts. These folks were there to see the Pope, who was there on parade. And as we can see, this lady in the center of the photograph is enjoying it with her own eyes. The people around her are trying to enjoy it through their phones. And this sort of just gives a definition of a moment in time. And we can react to it. We get a story from it. The fellow with the sunglasses and the hat is still trying to figure out his phone, as some of us are. So this is one of those moments where we can look at a photograph and we can get a very instant story from it. It's a clear communication. The second version of this is one of the most photographs ever taken. This is the very first photograph we ever got to see as the human race of our own planet. So this was taken from the moon, and yes, we did land on the moon, and yes, the Earth is round. So there was that. But this photograph, which actually is so important, it has a title, The Blue Pill, is credited with beginning the environmental movement here on our planet. Seeing the fragile blue pill hanging quietly in the vastness of the black universe, without any borders, we began to question, and we began to see, and we began to empathize with the fragility of this planet. And this photograph, taken in the late 1960s, still has importance today as we continue to take care of our planet. So a story can be effective, a story can breed action, and a story can create emotions in our audience. So how do we do that? Well, I needed to find out some information for myself. Something different, not just a book, not just the internet as we found, but something that would get to the very center of what story was. So about 10 or 11 years ago, when I was on Twitter, when Twitter was cool and not what it is now, a lot of people were finding out through Twitter that you could talk to some people that you wouldn't normally be able to. And I was able to ask a question of Andrew Stanton. And if you've seen WALL-E or Finding Nemo or Finding Dory or the Toy Story films, Andrew Stanton was the writer and director of many of those. He's done a lot of research on story. He's done a TED Talk on story. He continues to write for films and television. And he was stuck at an airport and said, hey, ask me some questions. So I sent him a question. My question was, what comes first, story or character? And his answer kind of blew my mind. His answer was, story is character. Plotting is just a means to figuring out who your characters are. And this, to me, is the very center of the answer of what my question was, which is, what is story? And it was like Yoda was bringing me the information from above. So story is character. If we're going to take one thing from today's talk, it's this statement, that every story you tell whether it's about yourself or about somebody else or about a group of people, is focused on character. So, if great stories are made of great characters, then what makes a great character? I think this is an important study, and I think there's 4 definitions of that. The first, successful characters must reflect identifiable human traits. Now, that might seem funny because we're telling a story with humans in it, but a lot of times we'll look at fictional stories, we'll read fictional stories, and we'll question the decisions that the characters are making. That seems very convenient, or this movie isn't really connecting with me very much, or this book is, I'm just going to lay this book down. The characters aren't conveying the trueness of themselves. Now, I certainly am not a perfect person. I'm also not as flawed as I might consider myself to be. I am just a human being, as you are, as all of us here are. We must reflect in our fictional characters the same sensibilities that we have. Reactive emotions, outrage, love, frustration, all of the different emotions, all of the different decisions that we make throughout the day will reflect our human traits, and we can identify with them. The second is, as that is the case, reflecting identifiable human traits, successful characters will reveal themselves by the choices they make. What I wore today, my decision of what friends I keep, what food I like, what films and stories and entertainment I consume, what education I choose. It truly reveals who I am every day. So we are each individuals, and we're always making decisions based on the world around us. And so as storytellers, we must understand that we must show our characters making choices. The third would be, what is the biggest fear and or greatest passion of our characters? Now, assuming you've seen the movies of Harry Potter, we would look at Harry Potter as someone who has a great passion for finding friendship and finding love and finding his place in the world, which is very identifiable. We must understand what is the greatest fear, what is their greatest passion. And a really compelling story will take that character's greatest fear and place it right in front of them. Or will take their greatest passion and take it away from them. And the question then is, are you going to fight for it? Are you going to fight to overcome that fear? Are you going to fight to return to your passion? And so the fourth one is, we must pick their most significant day and tell that story. It was a very significant day in Harry Potter's life when he found out he was a wizard and that he got to go to wizarding school. That is the impetus of, hey, there might be an opportunity for me to overcome my fears and to find my passions. So this is what makes successful characters. Now, one of my most favorite movies growing up, I saw this when I was a young child, was E.T. And we all know what E.T. wants. It's very clear. If you've seen the film or even know about E.T., it's a very famous saying, E.T. wants to go home. It's a very clear passion. It's a very clear desire. But E.T. isn't about E.T. E.T. is about Elliot, the little boy that finds E.T. Elliot is the middle child of a family that's going through a lot of struggles. He has to take care of his sister, and he gets picked on by his older brother. And so he's just trying to find some sort of sense of connection. And he finds an alien in the shed. Now, as we go along, we realize that through more information, we are now growing fearful because there's a consequence here. If E.T. doesn't leave Earth, he's going to die. Elliot wants nothing more than to stay friends with E.T. But he does what a really great friend would do, which is put his friend's needs over his own, and he sacrifices that, and he helps E.T. go home. And at the end of the movie, we all cry. And I named my son Elliot, because that's how important this movie is. So another great example is a much bigger example, and this is probably a character we're very, very familiar with. Woody from the Toy Story films. Now, Woody wants nothing more than to be connected to Andy, his owner. Woody is a very sentient toy. He understands his place in the world. He understands that his job is to be played with. But the extra layer on top of that is that he is Andy's favorite toy. So, what would be his fear? If his passion was playing with Andy and being Andy's favorite toy, well, his fear would be being replaced. And it would look like this.
Buzz Lightyear to Star Command. Come in, Star Command. Star Command, come in. Do you read me? Why don't they answer? My ship! Blast. This'll take weeks to repair. Buzz Lightyear mission log, stardate 4072. My ship is run off course en route to Sector 12. I've crash landed on a strange planet. The impact must have awoken me from hypersleep. Terrain seems a bit unstable. No readout yet if the air is breathable. And there seems to be no sign of intelligent life anywhere.
Hello?
And thus, Buzz Lightyear becomes Andy's favorite toy. Toy Story, the first movie, investigates the fear of being replaced. Something that's very close to all of us. Maybe you're an older sibling and the younger sibling came along and you're like, well, I guess no one's going to pay attention to me anymore. Or maybe you're in elementary school and a new kid shows up and he's got really cool shoes and you're like, well, I don't have cool shoes. I'm not going to be part of the group anymore. It's a very universal fear. And what's really successful about the Toy Story characters and the Toy Story films is that rather than just taking the characters and putting them in completely different scenarios just to entertain us, they investigated that passion and that fear further and further and further. So in Toy Story 2, it was the investigation of the fear of being abandoned by Andy. They were collected by a collector and were going to be sold to Tokyo and put in a museum. And, well, isn't Andy going to come and get us? In Toy Story 3, it was the fear of leaving Andy. Andy was all grown up. He was going to college, so he put the toys in the attic, and Woody was like, well, I'll just stay here till he comes back, realizing that Andy was going to leave. And so Andy gives the toys to Bonnie. Woody is no longer going to be the favorite toy. That was what defined him. But he has friendships with the other toys, and of course with Buzz Lightyear, who has now become his closest friend. And in Toy Story 4, it becomes the retirement film, where Woody now has to really investigate his fear of just truly not having Andy anymore. It defined him for his whole life and the whole existence that we knew Woody of. And so those films are exploring Woody's fears continually, much like us. We have many fears, we have many passions, we're very complex people. We get to communicate that and share that and experience that, and our films and our stories should reflect that human condition. So we've got that, we've got our characters, we understand that story is character. Now how do we construct it? How do we build it? How do I share it with you? How can I effectively communicate that? Well, one of the phrases in that Twitter reply was, plotting is just a means to figuring out who our characters are. Well, how do we figure out our characters? Well, it would be the same as going on a road trip. I have to plot out my destination, my journey to get there. Where do I get gas? Where do I get snacks? What kind of playlist do I put on Spotify? How am I going to get there? So the plot of a story is really just the moments where the characters are making decisions. And that is what we're plotting along, is making sure that it's very clear to the audience what kinds of decisions the character's making. And so we can build that around a narrative structure. Now, it's very common to hear there's 7 basic plots, and there's Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3, and there's the inciting incident, and then there's obstacles and a climax and the end. And that's a very traditional way of telling a story. But I think when you're in the genesis phase of creating a story, and you're planting that seed of ideas, and you've got all these different ideas surrounding you, you can write these out in an outline. And I suggest that between those main ideas that you have, they might just be random thoughts. They might be scenes in your head. It might be the beginning and it might be the end, but how do I put it all in the middle? A really helpful thing to do is to, in between those main points, put, because of that, and then another point, but, exclamation, another point, therefore, this happens. One big mistake we make in storytelling is this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then that happens. And I've already bored you just in that statement. And there's no connection, there's no cause, and there's no effect, and there's nothing for us to react to. So if something happens, and because that thing happened, I can now make this decision. But something else happened, and now I must make this decision, so therefore, this happens. This is the sort of secret to effective storytelling. So if you're going to take one little tip and put it in your little pocket, it's because of that, but, and therefore. And even if you've already worked on a story, or you're working on a story right now, or you're working on a presentation, much like this one. This one very much runs that way. It's an effective way of engaging your audience, because they're going to start to ask questions. Well, because of that, what's going to happen? But that happens, so what's going to happen? We're constantly leaning into the story. And we're very interested in finding out how those characters are going to overcome those obstacles. And so that leads us to conflict. And we don't have a story without conflict. That's at the core of what the story is: characters, conflict. That's what we're interested in. And so what's interesting about conflict is, as an audience, it's really important for us to understand what are the consequences of not overcoming those obstacles. We must have that information. If this doesn't happen, this is going to happen to that person. And then we get the chance to go, ooh, yeah, what if that happened to me? I don't know what I would do in that moment. So a film like Back to the Future, which has been around for many years, Marty McFly gets stuck in 1955. We understand the consequences that if he doesn't fix the flux capacitor, he's going to be stuck in another time. And we instantly put ourselves in there. And I don't think many of us would survive in 1955 without our phones, right? We'd be kind of helpless. We wouldn't know how to work. So there's 4 different kinds of conflict. There's situation conflict, activity conflict, manipulation conflict, and fixed attitude. So situation is, I don't want to be here. Harry Potter, living with his aunt and uncle under the stairs, I don't want to be here anymore. Activity, well, I don't want to do this. I want to change what I'm doing. Manipulation, you can't make me. And fixed attitude, well, I believe differently. These are natural conflict tension points. And they're not all necessarily negative. We can have a wonderful discussion based on our differences of opinion, but they're also based on our life and our connection to life and our experiences. And so it's interesting for me to learn about your experiences, as it would be for you to learn about mine, because I'm going to learn about life. So we're going to put the pressure back on you, the viewer, right now, you, the audience. How do you become an effective storyteller? This is storytelling and storyteller, you as the author. So the definition in the dictionary comes up as, number one who tells or writes stories. That's very kind of basic. Number 2, one who communicates clearly. We've discussed that this morning already. Number 3, one who has something to say. Number 4, one who asks questions. And number 5, which is my favorite, which is why it's highlighted, is one who tells lies. Now, I don't mean hurtful lies or things that are vindictive or a betrayal. I mean our permission to embellish. So if we go back to the definition, sharing is communication, embellishment is the creativity. So if I went away for the weekend, or when I return to Vancouver, having been to Mexico, many people are going to come and say, how was your trip? What did you do? And I will say, well, there was this one thing that happened, and you're not going to believe what happened, but here I'm going to tell you the story. And maybe you've had this experience, because it's happened to me, where you're at a party, you're at an event, maybe you went to a wedding, and you're explaining something really funny that happened to somebody else, to somebody who wasn't there, and you go through the process of telling that story, and you're really excited to get to the punchline because you're going to get a big laugh out of your friend, and you get there, and you get no reaction. They just kind of like, oh. And you're like, oh. And again, I don't know what this saying is in Spanish, but in English we say, well, you just had to be there. But really, I didn't. You had to be a better storyteller, because you can paint that picture in my mind in a way that was probably even better than how it happened, because you have the ability to lie about it. And what I mean by lying is removing the boring parts, removing the stuff where you go from A to B, the part where I woke up in the morning and brushed my teeth. Nobody wants to know that. I get to take the essence of that story, take the very heart of it, and present just that part of it. It's like the best part of the meat that you cut off, and that's the good part. That's all we want. So the lying part of it is not a negative. The lying part is the permission you give yourself to embellish the character. Maybe the story is a big one, and you've got 14 people. Well, let's bring that down to just a couple of characters. We can amalgamate them together. We can speed time. We can edit what happened in a way that becomes much more effective for the storyteller. So as a storyteller, I believe you have something to say. Now, that might sound scary. It might put you in a vulnerable position. Maybe you're an artist, a painter or photographer, and you're very scared of sharing those ideas because you're very likely connected to them. It means something to you. Maybe the world around you means something to you. So you have something to say. I truly believe that A lot of people in school especially will be like, oh, my story is starting to look like something else, or I don't have any original ideas. Well, the fact of the matter is you're alive and you're experiencing life in your own individual way. So no matter what story you tell me, no matter what art you present to me, is going to be inherently original. It's going to be an assembly of all the different experiences in your life. All the things you like, you're going to take, and it's going to look like that. So even if you start to say, well, it's starting to look like Star Wars, or it's starting to sound like this, that's a good thing, because now I know what you like. And you get to show me your experiences, you get to tell me your story. Even if we think it's been told before, you get to. Art is sustenance. I have a responsibility as a fellow human to offer you sustenance through my experiences. And so when you're in that position where you're like, I don't know what I need or want to say, you can ask yourself, well, what is it that I want to learn? What am I curious about? You've already got many experiences in your life, no matter if you're 5 years old or 55 years old or 105 years old. We all have our ongoing experiences, and I think it's important, it's a responsibility for us to open ourselves up to the possibility of sharing those with other people. Because sometimes people will ask, well, does somebody want my story? Are they going to like it? I think a more important question is, maybe somebody needs your story.
Maybe somebody needs your story.
So stories help us understand ourselves and others. It's a way of bringing our cultures together, our peoples together. We need stories more than ever in today's world. Certainly as we're coming out of this pandemic and as we're becoming more aware of the world around us and we're sharing these ideas and we're becoming a global community, we need stories more than ever. We need that sustenance to help understand each other. That's the only way we're going to heal, is to be able to truly understand where each of us is coming from. And so the most important part of storytelling then is to remember you are the main character of your own story. No matter if it's a fictional story and you've got crazy characters and they're doing wild things, they're experiencing things, and you've probably, as the storyteller, experienced those things yourself. Something similar. You've had those feelings. You've had those feelings of the fear of being abandoned or the passion to pursue something. That is a universal thing we can connect to. And so as the storyteller, you're building empathy in the audience. And so you can start your story with once upon a time or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And what that is it's an invitation into your world. And it's an invitation to say, I have sustenance for you. I have become vulnerable. And I am offering it back to you, and somebody out there is going to need it. So rather than worry about someone's going to like it, or they're going to want it, or they're going to pay attention to it, or if they're even going to want to see it, or read it, or experience it, or listen to it, irregardless of that, our storytelling abilities, our artistic abilities is sustenance, and thus I believe it's a responsibility for us.
Sure.
So thank you everyone for your time. Hopefully that sort of envelope some ideas around storytelling that we don't often think about. But for me, through all my research and the way I help students at the school, this has become a very effective way to just kind of try and find the real true meaning of what story is.
Oh, great. Thank you, Colin. And as you said at the beginning that you were going to just ask the questions and answer the questions, that happened to me because before we start this talk, I was thinking, oh, what am I going to ask Colin about that? and you did that. You asked the questions and you gave me the answers. And but I had something that I was thinking. You have a character. Let's say you said that the story is the character.
Yeah.
So they are together. Mm-hmm. But let's say that you have in your mind the character, but you don't have the story.
Yes.
I think that if you have a bad story, you can kill that character.
Mm-hmm.
Or probably if the story is great and the character is like something that is not good, that could like rise that character
Yes.
and make it a star. Like
Absolutely. I think there's an imbalance that can happen, and it's a misunderstanding from the storyteller to the work. I think, there's a lot of times where stories are made for the wrong reason, or maybe it's not wrong reason, but it's a reason that isn't connected to the heart of their search for that character. It's like, well, we're going to find the biggest audience possible. And we're all going to go to a Marvel movie, and millions of people are going to watch it, and there's going to be spectacle, and it's colorful, and it's song and dance and action and whatever it might be, but we forget who the characters are. We just remember the moments that happened. So there's a bit of an imbalance there. That's not to say one is better than the other. One still has value in that. But I think in the stories that will be lasting, and the stories that actually will feed us as humans, the storyteller must understand those characters. So the story will come out of, will be born out of, well, this is what the character actually wants. And maybe even more importantly, what does the character need to learn? They might not know what they need to learn. Finding Nemo is a great example of that. The father fish is just like, oh, you got to go to school, and then he loses them, and he's got to find them. But really what he needed to do was learn that inside he could trust himself, to trust his child, to trust that he's raised that child, and that that child is also going to not be him, is going to find its own way. Yes. It's a very difficult thing to go through as a parent, and those who aren't parents might not connect with that. But I think it's really important for the storyteller and thus the audience to understand, oh, this character needs to learn something. They need to learn about themselves, they need to learn about the world, maybe they change their perspective a little bit, and thus that is what the story actually is showing us. And that's what makes a good story, is when we have a clear understanding of what the character needs and achieves it at the end. Or the inverse of that is they know what they need to learn and they don't get there. That's called a tragedy, of course. But maybe along the way they have learned, and maybe they've taught other people. They've had impacts on the other characters.
Yeah. Well, first, I was thinking when you gave us the key points of to tell a story, I was thinking, oh, I know how I'm going to tell my wife how was this interview with you. Oh, look,
yes,
to create this bad and to create this conflict, and you know, if Colin was not coming, what would happen? That it's great, yeah, and they are great ideas that can give us not just to, as you said, tell a boring story about something that we did, but to create something that catch the attention of our listener.
That's right.
So great. I was thinking something else. We have like a
few more minutes.
Few more minutes. Yes. And do you think that a writer, something that is writing a story, can transmit to the character something that he or she would want to be?
Yes, absolutely. Our characters can become proxies for versions of ourselves that we might not be able to be or fearful of being. And it's a way for us to explore, well, if this happened to me, if I did this, which I probably wouldn't, how would that occur? How would that then plan out? And how would I react to that? And you get to sort of become like an avatar in a sense that is a proxy for you. And that happens all the time. You know, you might be working as a professional on a film like I have, where you're like, well, I mean, I'm not that character, but that character is struggling with something that, well, okay, I've struggled with that before. I've struggled with loss, or I've struggled with maybe doubting myself. Their version of it is different, and my version of it is individual. But I get that moment of like, well, that's what it felt like. And that's what it felt like to overcome that. And this is the things I had to do to achieve that success. Or when I failed, these are the mistakes I made in that failure. And this is what I learned from that failure. So it's a constant connection to those characters, which are just, like I said, they're avatars for all of us. And we can look at, you know, I'm not a wizard. I don't think you're a wizard. We haven't gone to wizarding school, but we watch those films and they're entertaining, but we understand that at the core of that is a boy who is an orphan and is trying to find a family. And if we lost our family, we would have those same feelings. And so we want Harry Potter to find his family. We want Marty McFly to get back to the present because that is where he feels comfortable. And whenever we're removed from our comfort zone, we know what that feels like. We know the anxieties that happen. We know how we solve that problem. I've never been to Mexico City before, and it's very exciting, and I don't know where I am, and I'm usually pretty good with a compass, but I'm like, I don't know which way is left or right. So that is a physical, being lost, and sometimes you're an emotional loss, and sometimes you're in a spiritual loss. And I think as humans, we all experience those events in different ways. So we can funnel that into a character and present that through. And then what ends up happening when you are writing a story, that character starts to tell you what the story is.
Great.
A great example of that is the Pixar film Inside Out. Mm-hmm. And what had happened was the director had a young daughter who was becoming a teenager, and when they were young, they were very bouncy, and as kids are, and then when they became a teenager, everything kind of like went sad and dour, and he was very worried about it, obviously, but also kind of very curious about what happened there, because he had experienced something similar, and that's when it was like, well, what's happening inside the head? So you've got anger and joy and fear and sadness, and the story is essentially telling us and showing us the value of sadness, that not every second of the day is going to be happy. There's going to be different variations of that. And maybe you've never felt the same happy twice. You've never felt the same sadness twice. But we know that we can allow those feelings in and work with them and then overcome them and then use that energy and that learning to move on in our life. So these are explorations of things that we are going on in our mind every day. And in this case, we did it through a cartoon inside a little girl's head, right? But really, it was an experience of a father.
Of course. It's like you identify exactly with the character, and this creates this connection between the character and you. And I think that's why a movie, a short film, impact you and preserves in your mind forever, because you got that connection with the character, because you felt that it was part of your life, of part of what you felt or what you did or what happened to you.
Yeah, you become a witness to their experience, and by being a witness, you are learning from that. I think what's really wonderful about film, as an animator, I feel film and television is the greatest art form. If you're watching a really great film and you're engaged in the story, you forget where your car is parked, you forget what bill you have to pay, you forget what temperature it is, you forget that you have to go get groceries. You're just completely into the story and engaged in it. And when you're in that mindset, you're open to learning. Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about film. Yeah.
Oh, great, Colin. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this talk. I think it's going to be very valuable for not just for our students, but everybody that is watching us right now.
Great.
Because that the key points of a product, an entertainment product, is to have a story behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be able to design it in a right way is also makes the success or the failure completely of the story. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Muchísimas gracias a toda nuestra audiencia. Vamos a seguir en unos minutos más con nuestro foro y que tengan todos y todas un muy lindo día. Gracias.
Gracias.